Trump is having second thoughts about actual military action. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think so. I think what they're doing at the moment is trying to buy time through the negotiation track. Iran may also be trying to buy time to to fully set up its air defense systems, and also to reinforce its borders, which is related to what I'm going to talk about now. But I just wanted to show two sections from Trump's congressional speech yesterday. First of all, here he talks about the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani back in 2020.
And we took out Soleimani. I did that during my first term. Had a huge impact. He was the father of the roadside bomb. And just over the last couple of months with the protests, they've killed at least, it looks like, 32,000 protests. 32,000 protests.
I mean, first of all, I just want to remind everyone that it was not only General Qasem Soleimani who was killed by Trump's assassination. There he takes credit for it, as he has recently taken credit for putting Jolani and the al-Qaeda forces in power in Syria, but it was also General Mohandes, who was leading the popular mobilization forces in Iraq, who was killed with Soleimani, both of whom were genuinely fighting ISIS on the ground in Syria and Iraq. And Qasem Soleimani was responsible for the training of the National Defense Forces for the Syrian Christians in Syria to be able to defend themselves against ISIS and the Takfiri forces. So that's just a reminder of who Trump actually killed in that assassination. And then he goes on, he also, of course, is using the exaggerated numbers on those killed in the recent Mossad, CIA, MI6 engineered riots in Iran. And then he goes on to talk about the latest threat from Iran.
But this is some terrible people. They've already developed missiles that can threaten Europe and our bases overseas, and they're working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States of America. After Midnight Hammer, they were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons, yet they continue.
So we really are in weapons of mass destruction territory now with Iran, and it's very clear to me that there is going to be no backing off from this, whether that's Israeli Netanyahu pressure on Trump, or Trump simply has as part of his agenda to fully destabilize Iran. And as I'm going to point out, I don't think it's any longer going to be simply a kinetic war. I think we're now entering the territory of really a full-blown hybrid war. Let's just have a look at this map, which shows very clearly the Kurdish areas, so the areas in Turkey, in Syria, in Iraq, on the border with Iran, and even inside Iran. Now, what is interesting, that entire conglomeration of Kurdish population is between 30 to 40 million, according to conservative estimates. Of course, the separatist factions within those populations are very much backed by Washington and Israel against Iran. So that gives an indication of how big this threat is. And recently on UK Column, I published an article which talks also about British intelligence has been radicalizing children in the Syrian ISIS prisons for the long war against Iran, because Trump basically gave the green light to Jolani to retake the northeast, pushing the Kurds out into the far northeast corner and releasing ISIS fighters up to 15 to 20,000 from the prisons, which then become a threat in Iraq and also potentially on the border with Iran. Then we have, this is effectively the release of an Israeli documentary talking about the training of Kurdish separatist proxies in Iran, so within Iran itself and on the borders of Iran, specializing in protest training and resistance training. That's the Israeli terminology, to Iranian security forces. And then very recently, in the last few days, Iranian Kurdish factions have formed an alliance which is apparently has as its mission to topple the Tehran government. So it's an alliance of 5 members of various political groups within the Iranian Kurdish areas known as the political forces, or the alliance, of political forces of Iranian Kurdistan. At the moment, we have videos circulating on social media that I've been able to, if we can just put that up on screen, that I've been able to confirm that IRGC and Iranian military are heading to the border between Iran and Iraq, obviously building up defense against the potential of an attack from Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan, and even from within Iran itself. So clearly for me, this is part of a hybrid war. There is no chance that the US and Israel are going to be able to cross borders into Iran. They would be eliminated. But what they appear to be doing is grouping their proxy forces together. And then in addition to that, apparently, according to Ehsan Safanejad, who's an Iranian analyst that I've been speaking to quite often in the last few weeks, he's saying that the Iranian forces are now erecting a security wall on that border. So they seem to be well aware of the threat. And then let's have a look at something that Ehsan said on X the other day, I think about 3 days ago, which I totally agree with. So what he's saying is, what if the US attack on Iran coincides with peaceful protesters, in inverted commas, taking it to the street to show their support for regime change in Iran? After all, the mainstream told you that armed insurgents in western parts of Iran were mere peaceful protesters. Why wouldn't they do it again? And of course, we now know they are being trained by Israel. So that seems to be the job now quietly distributed among a network of armed groups on Iran's periphery, the PJAK, PAK, the so-called National Kurdistan Army, the MEK terrorist group, the Baloch Liberation Army in the south, and the merger of terror groups in southeast Iran with Jaish al-Adl. Each has its own baggage, its own ideology, its own patrons, but together they form something bigger, a patchwork of proxy forces that can bleed the Islamic Republic when it's dealing with a US bombing campaign without a single foreign soldier crossing the border. So exactly as I said. And then if we move to Netanyahu and his recent address at the start of a government meeting in the Knesset, he talks basically about alliances in the region, and he says, in the vision I see before me, we will create an entire system, essentially a hexagon of alliances around or within the Middle East. He goes on to say in the same speech, an axis of nations to challenge the radical axes, as he calls them, both the radical Shia axis, which of course is predominantly the resistance axis itself, and the emerging radical Sunni axis, to which, of course, he's referring ISIS and al-Qaeda in Syria, although, of course, they were instruments of Zionist power in the region, as well as working on behalf of the US and the British. And then, in addition to this, US forces have rather unexpectedly fully withdrawn from inside Syria. If we have a quick look at the map, you'll see that in the northeast, they've fully withdrawn and taken their forces into the Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan region under the Kurdistan regional government there, which again reinforces my idea or my speculation that they are planning a multiple-pronged proxy attack against Iran with US support within the Kurdistan region in Iraq. And then from the Al-Tanif base on the border with Iraq and Jordan, they've effectively withdrawn to Jordan. What does this do? This leaves a vacuum inside Syria, which has potential also, if we look at the next map, for, as I mentioned, there in the section on the Jordan-Iraqi border, for ISIS to move where the Al-Tanif base was, where they were recruiting, arming, and training all manner of terrorist factions, but including ISIS, to be able to traverse Iraq and reach the Iranian border. You then have the same in the northeast, that ISIS might potentially cross Iraq if it can. Of course, there is resistance forces in Iraq towards the Iranian border. You have the threat there from Kurdistan, factions, both inside Iran and on the border with Iran in Iraq. From the top there in Azerbaijan, Britain, the US and Israel have been building up their influence, their surveillance capability and military presence in Azerbaijan, which is on the northern border of Iran. Going around again to Turkmenistan. Many of the terrorists that are actually in Syria came from Turkmenistan. So again, I consider that to be a threat. And you also have another Kurdish area there. Also from Pakistan, you have terrorists from the Balochistan area that may join with the Baloch freedom fighters, as they're called, in the south of Iran. And also, I would say we can't discount India. Prime Minister Modi is in Israel today. They've agreed on an $8.6 billion defense agreement, and Israel is providing India with air defense technology. And India is the first to receive it. It's never actually been given either to the US or to the UK or to any other country in the Zionist bloc, but it's being given to India. So basically, this is how I perceive the war is going to proceed against Iran.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. I'm sure we'll talk more. Vanessa, let's come back to you then and move back to the Middle East and the question of what Israel is doing.
Yeah, interesting, the question of conscience very quickly, and we should discuss that in extra, that there is a potential that the crew of the USS Gerald Ford are actually pushing back against their 300 days at sea and the potential of being targeted in a war against Iran. And they are potentially sabotaging the mission. So that's something we should definitely discuss in extra, because perhaps conscience is now coming to the fore among many of the military and some of these surveillance and AI organizations. Just an aside. So, of course, Israel, in addition to building up the proxy forces as part of the hybrid war against Iran, of course, it's threatening the Lebanese resistance. It's basically passed messages through various diplomats and politicians in Lebanon saying if Hezbollah should respond in any way, if the US and Israel enter a war with Iran, it would hit multiple targets, more than 1,200 targets in Lebanon, including the only civilian airport, which of course would be a humanitarian war crime, with multiple civilian flights coming in and departing on a daily basis. And then basically in the last 3 days, they've carried out an extensive attack on the eastern border in Lebanon, in the Bekaa area. If we can just have the slide up on screen. The death toll from the Israeli strike comes to now 10 people killed, including the leadership of Hezbollah, over 30 injured, the majority of civilians. At the same time, they've also carried out drone strikes against Lebanese army positions in the south, because the Lebanese army dared to actually establish a new border post in southern Lebanese territory without coordination with Israel. So heaven forbid they do that and act as if Lebanon is a sovereign country. So Israel carried out strikes. And finally, I want to actually bring everyone's attention to this story, which I think broke the heart of everyone here in Lebanon. You either die with your family around you or you die alone. This is a gentleman who is, I think, a 62-year-old father and grandfather. He went with his wife to visit his family in southern Lebanon. He received a call from an Israeli number saying, you have a choice. You can die with your entire family and his wife's family, or you can leave them and die alone. He made the choice. He left his family, he got into his car, and he was assassinated. So just for people to understand the sheer psychopathy that is being generated against the Lebanese people on an almost daily basis.
Thanks, Vanessa, for that report. Now, plenty to talk about in extra today.